is the story of the man who killed Jeffrey Dahmer. Christopher Scarver was a junior in high school when he was kicked out of his mother's house for being an alcoholic. He then took a job as a carpenter in training and was promised that when he completed his training, he'd be hired full-time. Unfortunately, the man who promised him this was let go and replaced by a man named Steve Lohman. Christopher was enraged when he didn't get his job, so he went to Steve demanding his money and shot him in the head 3 times after receiving it. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and convicted and was sent to life in prison with fellow inmate Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer was a convicted serial killer and sex offender who had murdered and eaten over 17 boys. One morning, the two were assigned to clean the prison gym. When Jeffrey turned his back, Christopher murdered him with a 20-inch bar from the weight room. He received 2 additional life sentences, and when asked why he did it, he said that Dahmer made him extremely uncomfortable and wasn't sorry for what he did.
So about 10 minutes ago, there was an update in the disappearance of Nicola Bully. Nicola went missing last Friday whilst walking her dog near the River Wire. And just moments ago, police released a CCTV image of a woman walking her dog who they now believe may have been the last person to see Nicola. It's important to note that the police want to talk to this woman as a potential witness and not a potential suspect. In fact, police have now said that they have no reason to suspect that a third party is involved with Nicola's disappearance. Authorities are continuing an extensive search of the river as well as searching an old abandoned house near to where Nicola went missing. Hopefully, Nicola will be located soon and her family and friends will have answers.
6 teenage boys played a harmless ding-dong ditch prank on this man's home, and just minutes later, 3 of them were dead. On the evening of January 19, 2020, 6 teenage boys and best friends were having a sleepover and celebrating Jacob Avascu's 16th birthday. Later that night, one of the boys was dared to either jump into a pool or ding-dong ditch somebody's house, and after choosing the latter, they all got into a Prius driven by their 18-year-old friend and picked a random house. The house they chose belonged to 45-year-old Anurag Chandra in Corona, California. Once there, one of the teens hopped out, rang the doorbell, mooned the camera, and then got back into the Prius where they quickly drove off. But this harmless prank angered Anurag so much that he got into his car and started chasing the teens. He was going 99 miles per hour in a 40-mile-per-hour zone, and when he caught up to the Prius, he intentionally rammed into the back and side of it. This caused it to go off the road, quickly slamming into a tree and utility pole. The crash immediately killed Drake Ruiz, Daniel Hawkins, and Jacob Avascu, all 16 years old. According to Anurag, he didn't stop after the crash and proceeded to go home after hitting the kids because he didn't think anyone was hurt. He was arrested at his home later that same night. The driver and 2 other 13-year-olds who were also in the car were injured but survived the crash. During the investigation, Anurag said that the prank angered him so much, but also said that he decided to chase after the teens because he was worried for his family's safety after being mooned. It was also revealed that in the 3 hours before the prank, Anurag consumed 12 beers and was highly intoxicated. Anurag has just been charged with 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder and has since pleaded not guilty. He's due back in court on July 14th and faces life in prison without parole. It's also worth noting that at the time of the killings, Anurag was already facing domestic violence and battery charges in an
This video shows Caleb Brown chained up in the slave storage container of Todd Kohlhepp, the Amazon review killer. Between 2003 and 2016, he murdered at least 7 people in South Carolina, dropping several clues along the way. He left several reviews on Amazon products that he used in the killings, like this one that reads, "Keep in your car when you have to hide the bodies and left the full-size shovel at home." In 2016, Kayla and her boyfriend Charles went missing after they went to clean Todd's residence. No one heard from them for months until a post was made to Charles' Facebook page saying that he and Kayla were expecting a baby. Shortly after, an old photo of the couple was posted with the caption, "We are fine." This raised suspicions, leading police to trace these posts to a storage unit on Todd's property. There, they freed Kayla and took Todd into custody, where he bragged about burying several bodies on the property as well, including Kayla's boyfriend. He was given 7 life sentences, 1 for each of his murders, despite him confessing to many, many more.
This is breaking news about Rudy Farias, the Texas teen who went missing 8 years ago and was just found. Apparently, he was never missing, and said his mother was holding him hostage. Rudy reportedly said that his mother forced him to play daddy, drugged him, manipulated him, and abused him the entire 8 years he was missing. A lot of information was just released about an hour ago at a press conference, but let's go back to 2015. On March 6th, 17-year-old Rudy Farias was last seen walking his 2 dogs in Northeast Houston. His mother said he never returned home, but they found the dog safe. Authorities and volunteers searched for him, but they couldn't find him. Rudy's mother, Janie Santana, told police that he suffered from depression and PTSD since losing his brother in a motorcycle accident in 2011. A year before Rudy disappeared, his father, who was a Houston police officer, was facing an internal affairs investigation, and he took his own life while he was being investigated. Fast forward 3 years to 2018. And relatives of Rudy call police and say they saw Rudy behind another relative's house. Police show up and search, but they don't locate him. 5 years later, Rudy, who is now 25 years old, is found unresponsive outside of a church. According to Janie, her son had cuts and bruises all over his body and blood in his hair. She said her son had been badly beaten and abused. Janie also claimed her son believed he's 14 now and has a completely different identity. But get this, Rudy was found with his mother's credit card that was issued 2 years ago. So how did he get that card if he's been missing for 8 years, like she claims? If that's not weird enough, neighbors of Rudy came forward to the media and said that Rudy was never missing, and he's been living in this house with Janie the entire time. And they know that because Rudy would occasionally walk over to their garage and hang out. When confronted about this, Janie said that the neighbors were confusing Rudy with her nephew. But when they looked at a picture of her nephew, they were like, no, that's not who we saw Rudy. So police want to interview Rudy and find out what has happened the past 8 years. But Janie is saying that her son is nonverbal, which is very far from the truth. Because this morning, Quinnell X talked to Rudy himself for about an hour and a half. Quinnell X is a community leader and counselor, and he went to mediate an interview between the family and police. When everyone arrived to the hotel, Rudy asked if he could speak to Quinnell alone, away from his mother. And after being separated from his mother, Rudy apparently went into detail about his mother's abuse, and said he was tired of living like a slave. I'm about to play some clips from the press conference that just dropped an hour ago, and just a warning, these details are extremely disturbing.
I honestly believe, based on what he said to us, she was drugging the hell out this kid. And she convinced him that he was in trouble for initially running away. She would ask him to play daddy. She told him that he had to be the husband. She would force him to sleep in the bed with her.
Go to part 2 if you want to see his entire statement. It's extremely disturbing.
See, that's right. Is that a person? Oh, it's definitely a person. That's a person. That's a person.
This is what happened to 12-year-old Melissa Chavez and how they tried to cover up her murder with a fire. Melissa Chavez was born in 2008 in Coquimbo, Chile to her mother Mirta and her father Dennis. She was the youngest of 4, and she's described as being a very shy, quiet, and reserved child. She didn't really like to go out much. One of her favorite activities was to stay home, go in her room, put her headphones on, and just listen to music. She didn't have that many friends, but everyone says that she was really kind and just a happy little girl. Shortly after Melissa was born, her parents ended up getting a divorce, so now Mirta was a single mother. In order to make ends meet, she got a job working at a local bar called La Chilenita. And while she was working there, she met a man named Luis Santander. Now, Luis was actually in a relationship at the time, so he had a girlfriend, but he decided to leave his girlfriend so he could start dating Mirta, who was 8 years older than him. The two of them started dating, and then in 2010, they decided to take the next step and move in together. Eventually got married, and Mirta got pregnant and gave birth to a baby boy. Now, as for Melissa, her older siblings were already gone. They had moved out and, started their own lives. So now Melissa was just living with her mother Mirta, her new stepfather Luis, and then her new half-brother. Everything seemed to be going well, but when Melissa was just 6 years old, she told one of her older sisters that her new stepfather Luis was essaying her. Not only did she tell her sister about this, but she also told her school counselor, and that both of them reported this immediately to her mother Mirta. Now, at first, it honestly seemed like Mirta did believe her daughter. She actually went to the police station and she reported this. However, she later withdrew the report and said that she no longer believed Melissa and that she felt like her daughter was doing this for attention and that she was lying. Yeah, she said this about a 6-year-old little girl reporting her stepfather for essaying her. So even though she withdrew the statement, police still wanted to go through with the investigation because, these are very serious allegations. So they opened an investigation, and in the meantime, they removed Melissa from Mirta's care. This investigation went on for almost 2 years, and the only reason that Melissa was placed back in the custody of her mother Mirta was because Mirta told the authorities that she was going to divorce Luis and that he was no longer going to live in the house or be a part of their lives. So, she told police, it's perfectly safe for Melissa to come back to the house because Luis is no longer going to be there. And authorities and CPS just believed her. They didn't do an investigation to make sure that Mirta was going to divorce him. They didn't go check the house to make sure Luis was no longer there. Nothing. They just believed Mirta, and then they returned Melissa into her custody. They should have done a further investigation because Mirta lied. Luis was still part of their lives. He was still living in the house, and instead of protecting her daughter, she chose this man. November 26, 2020, at around 11:21 in the morning, firefighters and police arrived to Melissa's home after neighbors reported the house on fire. Firefighters went up to the second floor, and when they walked into Melissa's bedroom, they discovered her body lying on the top bunk of her bed. First, firefighters believed that she died due to suffocation from all of the smoke. However, when they got a better view of her body, they realized she didn't die because of the fire. They discovered that she had severe stab wounds to her neck, face, and her body, and that someone tried to cover up the murder with arson. Okay, more in part 2.
This 14-year-old was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, making him the youngest person to ever receive that sentence. So have you ever heard of Lionel Tate? Lionel was born on January 30th of 1988. As he grew up, people described him as having average intelligence, but he did have some street smarts. He did have some behavioral issues, as he had been kicked out of school about 15 times for stealing, lying, and fighting. And it seems like those behavioral issues were never properly addressed. Lionel was also not small. At 12 years old, he was almost 6 foot tall and weighed about 170 pounds. On the night of July 28, 1999, Kathleen, which was Lionel's mother, was asked to watch one of her closest friend's daughters, Tiffany Eunick. Tiffany was just 6 years old at the time and was a fraction of the size of Lionel. She only weighed about 48 pounds. Sometime in the evening, Kathleen decided that she wanted to go upstairs to her room and left the 2 younger children alone downstairs. At about 10 p.m., both Lionel and Tiffany were getting kind of noisy, so Kathleen screamed down the stairs telling them to keep the noise down. She did not go downstairs and physically check on the children at this time. But at about 10:40, Lionel goes up to the room and tells Kathleen that Tiffany is not breathing. Lionel told Kathleen that they were play wrestling and that he had Tiffany in a headlock. He says that she then smashed her head onto a side table and then started rolling around on the floor, where she urinated herself and was moaning, and he said she was acting like a baby. Lionel says that he left her alone and then sometime later went upstairs to get his mother when he noticed that she was not breathing anymore. By the time Kathleen got down to Tiffany, she was already cold. But upon closer examination, it would be revealed that Tiffany's injuries were far worse. She had bleeding in her brain, a cracked skull, a broken rib. Her kidneys were hemorrhaged. She had a lacerated liver, and she had so many bruises all over her body. A child abuse expert would testify in court, saying that the beating had to have lasted about 5 minutes, and it was the equivalent of a fall from a 3-story building. But Lionel claimed that he was just practicing the wrestling moves that he had seen on TV. It would take several years, but in 2001, Lionel would go on trial for first-degree murder, and he would be tried as an adult. I'm going to go to part 2. It will be up down in the comments, but I have to film it first, so give me just a couple of minutes.
It's time for cookies and crime. I'm going to provide a trigger warning for this one because there's a lot of talk of unaliving and there are children involved. This is the case of Andrea Yates. Andrea Yates was born in Houston, Texas, and was the youngest of 5 children. She suffered from bulimia and depression during her teenage years. She graduated from Milby High School in 1982. She was the class valedictorian, captain of the swim team, and an officer in the National Honor Society. She went on to become a nurse, and she met her husband, Russell Rusty Yales, a NASA engineer, at the Sunscape Apartments in Houston. They were married in 1993. Yates and her husband, a devout evangelical Christian, announced they would seek to have as many babies as nature allowed. Everything was normal until the birth of her 4th child, Luke, when Yates' depression resurfaced. On June 16, 1999, Rusty found Yates shaking and chewing her fingers. The next day, she attempted to unalive herself by overdosing on pills, leading her to be hospitalized and prescribed antidepressants. Soon after her release, Yates begged Rusty to let her die as she held a knife up to her neck. Once again hospitalized, she was given a plethora of medications, including Haldol, an antipsychotic drug. Yates' condition improved immediately, and she was prescribed it upon her release. Then in July 1999, Yates had a nervous breakdown and was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. Yates' first psychiatrist, Dr. Eileen Starbranch, testified that she urged her and Rusty not to have any more children, as it would guarantee future psychosis depression. Yet, they still conceived their fifth and final child approximately 7 weeks after her discharge. Then Yates stopped taking her antipsychosis medication in March 2000 and gave birth to her daughter Mary 9 months later. Yates seemed to be coping well until the death of her father on March 12, 2001. She then stopped taking any medication, harmed herself, read the Bible feverishly, and stopped feeding Mary. Her doctors told Rusty that she was not to be left alone as she could harm herself. At one point, Rusty told his brother-in-law that all depressed people just needed a swift kick in the pants to get them motivated. So Rusty left Yates alone with the kids for a few hours each day for her to gain back her independence. Then, on June 20th, 2001, Rusty left for work, leaving Yates alone unsupervised with the children. While he was at work, he received a disturbing phone call from his wife. She told him that she had done it, and he rushed home to see what exactly she did. Yates had drowned all 5 of her children in the bathtub. She called the police on herself and confessed to them what she had done. In court, she pleaded insanity, but was rejected by the jury and was given a life sentence instead. But then on January 6, 2005, a Texas Court of Appeals reversed the convictions, as one of the prosecution witnesses, Dr. Park Dietz, gave a false testimony during the trial. In his testimony, Dietz had stated that shortly before the murders, an episode of Law and Order had aired featuring a woman who drowned her children and was acquitted of murder by reason of insanity. He claimed that this is what inspired Yates. However, it was proven that no such episode existed. Again, Yates entered pleas of not guilty by reason of insanity, and on February 1, 2006, she was granted release on bail on the condition that she be admitted to a mental health treatment facility. She divorced her husband Rusty in 2004 and has been at the hospital ever since.
This is the case of Veronica Youngblood, a mother who killed her 2 daughters and then called their father to tell him. On August 5, 2018, around 10:15 p.m., Fairfax County Sheriffs received a 911 call from 15-year-old Sharon Castro. She told the dispatcher that her mom shot her twice, once in the chest, once in the back, and that her 5-year-old younger sister, Brooklyn, was also in the house. However, what Sharon didn't know was after she was shot, Veronica went over to Brooklyn's room and shot her once in the head, killing her, and then left the house with the plan to unalive herself. 9 days before this, Veronica bought a 9mm pew-pew, and on the night of the incident, she gave her daughters sleeping pill gummies so that way they would sleep heavier. After Sharon fell asleep, that's when the attack began, and once the police got there, Sharon was able to tell them that Veronica walked into her room and told her, quote, "I'm going to take you to see God," and shot her. Sadly, Brooklyn was pronounced dead at the scene, and Sharon was rushed to the hospital where she remained until she died 6 days later. As for Veronica, she had already left the house before the officers arrived and was driving in a rental car to a house of a man that she dated a few times in the past. While driving, she called her ex-husband Ron. He didn't answer, so the phone went to voicemail, and she left him a message saying, quote, "I killed Brooklyn, I killed Sharon, I'm going to kill myself, I hate you, bye." Just before 11:15 p.m., Veronica got to the house of the man that she used to date and knocked on the door. When he answered, she told him that she killed her children and showed him the weapon that she used. I couldn't find a for sure answer, but I do believe that he let her in the house and she did leave the firearm on the front porch. Right after she arrived, the man called the police and they did arrest her. During Veronica's interrogation, she told police that she bought the firearm with the plan to kill her daughters and herself, and she also said that she deserved the death penalty. At first, she was only charged with Brooklyn's murder, but that was changed, and she was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of use of a firearm to commit a murder, and she was held without bond. During the trial, the early years of her life were brought up, saying that she's from Argentina and that when she was younger, she was physically AB'd as well as essayed by family members. During her teenage years, her parents abandoned her, so she became an S-worker to support herself, and that's how she met her ex-husband, Ron. They got married in 2009 in Las Vegas, and they traveled depending on where Ron was stationed since he was in the Navy. They had a rocky relationship, and in 2016 they filed for a divorce, but while they were working that out, Rob obtained a protection order against Veronica after she damaged some of his possessions. Because of that, she was ordered to move out of the house, and that's when she moved into the apartment where the murders took place. Leading up to the murder, the family was supposed to move up to Missouri, but Veronica changed her mind a couple of months before. She wanted to stay in Virginia with her daughter, but the courts denied, and according to her defense attorney, he said that because of Veronica's PTSD, she feared that what happened to her in the past would happen to her children. A doctor said that she was in a depressive psychosis where she said that she was hearing voices that were telling her to kill herself and her children. Ultimately, she was found guilty on all charges on March 22nd, and it's expected that she's going to receive 78 years in prison. Brooklyn was only 5 and she loved ice skating and animals. Sharon was 15, loved ice skating, cheerleading, and would often put her hair in many different styles. She would always help anyone in need.
The following morning was May 3rd, 2019. Thomas walked into the school cafeteria and asked Ellie's friends if they'd seen her. He'd been looking for her the entire morning, as he wanted to discuss the breakup they had the previous evening. When Thomas heard that Ellie wasn't in school that morning, he wasted no time in trying to find her. He told one of the teachers that he wasn't feeling well, so he walked to the bus station nearby and took a bus back home. When he got to his house, he immediately changed his clothes. He put on a black hoodie and also took off his white sneakers and opted for his black ones. But just as he was about to leave the house, his mother arrived home. It seemed that she had come to pick up something. Thomas didn't want his mother to know that he skipped school, so he hid inside one of his cupboards and stayed there until she left. The minute she left, Thomas got out of the cupboard and took the keys to the family's spare car and set off towards Ellie's home, about a 10-minute drive away. When he got to Ellie's house, he knocked on her front door and told her that he wanted to speak to her. The two allegedly spoke in the kitchen, and an argument soon broke out after Thomas realized that Ellie was serious about the breakup. At some point during the argument, he started strangling Ellie, who was desperately fighting for her life, hitting and scratching Thomas, hoping he would let go. Thomas wasn't letting go, though, and continued to strangle Ellie until she passed out. He then went to grab a knife from the kitchen drawer and repeatedly stabbed Ellie in her neck, a total of 13 times. After he realized that she was dead, he took the knife out of her neck and went to wash it in the basin, making sure that he washed off his fingerprints. He then placed the knife back into Ellie's neck and placed her hand over the knife to make it look as though the wounds were self-inflicted. Thomas then proceeded to clean the crime scene before unlocking Ellie's phone and texting her friend pretending to be Ellie. He told the friend that she was no longer coming to school and that the friend didn't need to pick her up, ensuring that Ellie's body wouldn't be found until at least the afternoon. He then realized that Ellie had left scratch marks on his face and neck, so he set out to create an alibi for himself. He wrote a message in the group chat he had with friends, telling them that he was going through a difficult time due to the breakup and that he was scratching himself in an attempt at self-harm. After he posted the message to the group, he then sent a few messages to Ellie's phone, asking if they could meet up and talk about their relationship. At 3 p.m. that afternoon, Ellie's dad had come home from work.
So I pull up in the drive, Ellie's car, a small red car that she was learning to drive was on the drive. So I come into the house, walk into the kitchen, put my phone and wallet down on the table. And then from the corner of my eye, I see Ellie's legs. So I immediately rang for an ambulance. They tried to tell me how to resuscitate her. And I told them that it was pointless. I believe she was dead. It was horrific.